Should Gardai be able to read encrypted WhatsApp and Facebook private messages? Today we have a brand new Gript Media reaction, guys. Shout out to Gript Media. Go to their channel, like, subscribe, donate as well. They're great. Gript Media are good. Okay, they're the only independent media in Ireland as far as I'm concerned, apart from myself. Of course, you know, Gript Media are up here. I edge out Gript Media, of course, guys, just by a tad. But they're gaining quickly, guys. They're chasing my heels down, so they might overtake me soon. Who knows, guys? But we're gonna keep up the pressure. But yeah, Gript Media are on our side, so much love to Gript Media. Let's hear what they say, guys. I 100% disagree. I don't think any Gardai should be able to read your private messages or anything like that. You know, realistically, they're not catching ISIS members talking between each other. You know, they're just catching people that, you know, are sending memes and hurtful, you know, liberal, libtard kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, meany words, hateful memes to each other. You know, they don't like that, guys. You go to jail if you're a comedian anymore.
Justice Minister Jim O'Callaghan is working to give Gardai the power to break into encrypted messaging apps like WhatsApp and Signal so they can read people's private messages, including yours if the state feels that that's called for. And he justifies this on the basis that collective rights should sometimes supersede individual rights. You don't have to take my word for it. I'll allow the minister to explain in his own words. Increasingly, I see arguments put forth which suggest the absolute primacy of one right with little reference to or consideration of the others. This, I would suggest, has particularly been the case in relation to the right to privacy, which has in some fora been elevated as though were a right more significant than any of the others. We need to recall that the countervailing balance to the individual right to privacy is frequently the collective right to security. Collective rights need to be acknowledged and, on occasion, should supersede individual rights. One key area where the right to privacy cannot be permitted to become sacrosanct is the question of in which circumstance law enforcement and security services should be able to access data. None of us would like to imagine living in a surveillance state with all of our private life, our thoughts, our communications, our interests being observed and recorded. But neither, I think, would we like to imagine people who have taken or plan to take the lives of others continuing to walk free with impunity as a result of an inability on the part of the Gardaí to effectively investigate their crimes. The former suggestion would of course be a gross invasion of our right to privacy, but the latter would be an obscene disregarding of our right to life.
What's the famous phrase, guys? We're the government and we're here to protect you. I don't believe that for 1 minute, guys. When have the Gardai, or anyone for that matter of fact, stopped any terrorism or any sort of crazy attack on the Irish public because they were able to read WhatsApp and Signal and Facebook messages? When has that ever happened? Has it ever happened? I don't think so.
An obscene disregarding of our right to life. One concrete example of this is the question of what powers An Garda Síochána and other agencies have to intercept our communications. There is no right to criminal communication, and this is a point that needs to be central to our discussion in this area. The existing legislation, the Interception of Postal Packets and Telecommunications Messages Regulation Act 1993, is now over 30 years old. He then goes on to say that when the legislation was created, modern communication methods such as texting and social media DMs were not available. He continues, "We need to ensure that criminals, terrorists, and other hostile actors have nowhere to hide, that our investigations are effective and our obligations to victims are upheld, but also that we take full account of the right to privacy by having strict legal safeguards and oversight." Incidentally, this is actually in the programme for government, and the government assures us that there will be a public consultation on the matter, because we all know how much that's worth.
You'll also be aware that in the programme for government adopted earlier this year, there's a commitment in it to enact new interception laws and include provision for over-the-top and encrypted services to be included. And there will be extensive public consultation in respect to that. I think it's
who's consulting who, guys, here? It's just the Gardai. It's just the Gardai taking over and taking power. There's nobody consulting. There's nobody being consulted by anybody. It's just what we say, and that's it. You have to listen to us.
important that when we are considering a replacement of the 1993 legislation, that we do have widespread consultation in respect of it.
And don't worry, I will make sure that when that consultation process begins, I will be letting all of you know so that you can engage with the process and let the government know your thoughts. It should at this point be noted that the same state which is seeking to give itself the power to read private messages is already abusing similar powers when it comes to journalist sources. As previously reported by Gript earlier this year, this very news organisation that you're watching now had Gardai trying to secure a secret High Court order from a judge to read the private social media messages, not only of the Gript account itself, but of individual journalists who work for Gript, such as yours truly. And when asked about this, the Justice Minister said he didn't know anything about it, and he gave a rather unsatisfactory response.
The website Gript today published a Garda order that had been secured through the courts last year, where the guards were effectively looking for permission to access their Twitter or X DMs to try and identify sources about their coverage of protests in Newtown Mount Kennedy last year. The only reason why the sources were not revealed is because X, the website itself, refused to comply with that order. Is it the policy of a Garda Síochána to try and find out Garda sources through court means?
Well, sorry, I hadn't got any notification about this. I would have appreciated if you told me in advance. I would have tried to follow it up. I know very little about it. Was an application made to the High Court by the Garda Síochána?
To the district courts.
To the district court. Well, if it's an application to the district court, there is the system there of judicial oversight. There's obviously a provision in the legislation that permits the Gardaí to make that application. If the courts don't think it is appropriate, it won't be granted.
Are you comfortable in principle, though, with that provision being used to try and identify journalist sources?
Well, I think if you look at our legal system and the jurisprudence of the courts, journalist sources are protected. It's not just journalist sources. We've also had decisions of the superior courts where individuals who've come to members of the Oireachtas have had their identity protected. So I think it is very important to protect the identity of sources. But on the other side, you have to balance up, well, what is the conflicting objective being pursued? Is there an issue in respect of crime? Is there an issue in terms of trying to identify, and I'm not saying this applies in this situation at all, but you could have a situation whereby there's important information that can be accessed in respect to the commission of a crime, and that may justify the Gardaí looking for it. I haven't...
Hold on, everybody. Did you just hear what he just said right there? So he had me in the first half, I'm not going to lie, he had me in the first half where he said, you know, it doesn't really matter, we don't want to be chasing after people like this, but in the second half he said, so the first half he said journalistic integrity, but in the second half then he said, well, if there's crimes being committed, then we can look into it. Shit, what the hell does that mean? You can just make up a crime. Oh, there's a crime committed. Good job to X and Gript Media for not handing over those private messages. That is absolutely crazy. I'm not sure why anybody would be messaging Gript Media talking about doing riots in Dublin or any sort of, journalistic thing like that. I'm not really exactly sure, they're trying to access their private messages to try and get footage from people that, that recorded people, and then they could use that footage to kind of use it in the court to kind of, convict somebody of, looting Foot Locker or whatever. So that is crazy, guys. Wow. That's unbelievable.
Had the information about it, I look it up, but the good thing from what you say is that there's a court process and a district court judge will be appraising the application, and I can guarantee you there'll be judicial oversight of that.
There has been no follow-up or further comment from the minister since then, mind you, and Gript is not the only publication that's experienced this. As reported by the Irish Times just last year in 2024, call for GSOC and Minister of Justice to urgently address journalists' phones being accessed. The secret accessing of journalists' phone records raises many questions that must be urgently addressed by the government and GSOC, Ireland's biggest civil liberties group has said. Describing the tactics as surveillance activity by GSOC against journalists, the Irish Council for Civil Liberties has said it was concerned about the lawfulness and transparency of the data scraping practices. It believed key questions must now be answered. Whose sources were targeted and why? Gardai. What legal basis did GSOC rely on to carry out this activity? When did this activity begin and how often does it occur? Asked ICCL Executive Director Liam Herrick. The tracing of journalist sources under unclear circumstances risks undermining press freedom and the public's access to information.
Absolutely crazy, and for anyone that wants to, the Gardai or anyone that wants to hack into my phone and read any messages, all my messages will be talking about weightlifting, getting jacked, being better. What else do I have on my phone? That's about it, guys. Just how to get jacked, how to get better, and how to grow your social media. Okay, that's it, guys. Okay, but they're trying to say that, that's a joke, by the way, but they're trying to say that basically all these people now that are journalists like myself, civilian journalists, they're trying to say that everyone has encrypted information that's going to be used by the Gardai for some reason to stop crime. Like, does anyone believing that? Does anyone fall for that? It seems absolutely insane, guys, to be perfectly honest.
This kind of thing used to literally bring down governments in this country. The Charles Haughey government collapsed in 1981 specifically because of journalists' phones being tapped, such as Bruce Arnold and Vincent Brown and the like. And it was such a monumental scandal at the time, yet now similar carry-on barely gets a mention in the media. So given that authorities are already apparently abusing these kinds of powers and using them in a way that is at least dubious, to put it mildly, should we really be allowing them to bestow more powers upon themselves to read people's correspondence? I mean, the Justice Minister in his speech said that we need to ensure that people like terrorists have nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
And of course, we all agree with that on paper in theory. We all want to see the state deal with actual terrorism, obviously. But this is the same state that can't even clearly define the radical ideologies that it says it's trying to counter.
Exactly, and this reminds me of the American Patriot Act. After 9/11, they brought in this Patriot Act so they could just access everyone's data. They could just go through people's phones. They could tap your phones. They could chase your car. They could tap into your car and your house and this kind of thing. Raid your house without knowing if you're a terrorist. They could just label anyone a terrorist. You could be a terrorist. Anyone could be a terrorist. And that is crazy, guys. That is a crazy thing to be just throwing around. Anyone could be attacking the state. Like, nobody in reality is doing that, guys. And if they are, I would not want to lose 1 ounce of freedom for any terrorists that are putting crazy stuff on our country. Freedom comes first, guys. Always. Always freedoms come first. That's it.
How often do you hear politicians rant and rave about the so-called far right, and yet when asked to define the term, previous Justice Minister Helen McEntee said the phrase had no definition?
Could you give me a definition of what you consider is the far right?
In terms of a definition of the far right, I mean, it's obviously a political ideology, or it's a particular view that a person has.
Wait, hold on. Lads, this is gas. So being far right isn't actually a political ideology. That's actually not even what it would be. I wouldn't classify it as that at all. Right? What you would classify being far is more conservative leaning. That's all I would say. That's kind of the only, whether that's a political ideology, I mean, that's arguable because, it could also be social reasons, and it could also be like, economic reasons. You could be more socially conservative and then economically conservative and fiscal or socially, liberal. So very, very strange.
Ideology, or it's a definition of the far right. I mean, it's obviously a political ideology, or it's a particular view that a person has. I'm not sure there is a definition. It's not.
So it's a little bit like hate.
Well,
yeah. So
it's not.
I think we need to define.
Wait, hold on. It's not hateful though. Being more conservative, more right-leaning, isn't hateful, guys. Wow, this is just clown show.
A little bit like hate.
Well,
yeah. So
it's not.
So I think we need to define
Senator,
what it is.
you have a limited amount of time. If you interrupt the minister,
Okay.
you're going to run out of time. So just let her answer the question.
What the hell?
I think what we see from a lot of people who would claim to be far right, which is not a crime for somebody to have a particular ideology, it's where they act on maybe certain matters, but we have seen people to be anti-government, anti-state, anti-immigration, anti-women's rights, amongst other things. That would be my own.
Anti-women's rights. We don't need those. What did you say? anti-government, anti-Irish government. Everybody on the left is anti-Irish government. Everybody on the left is anti-state. I actually do believe in having a government. I'm not, I'm not against having a government. Obviously, you want it as small as possible. Anti-immigration, everybody's against anti-immigration. The people on the left, the liberals, are against anti-immigration. The ones with any brain in their brain cells. These sort of like liberals, these woke liberals, they're the only person that are against that are not against immigration. And women's rights, guys, what woman doesn't have rights, guys? Every woman has rights to do anything they want. This is just crazy stuff. Nobody is against that. Nobody on the right, anything like that. It's just that people don't like feminism, socially. It's crazy. Feminism has ruined the whole country.
Immigration, women's rights, amongst other things. That would be my own particular view of those who would claim to be far right.
So who's to say who is going to fall under the bracket of dangerous radical that needs to be monitored? If it's a catch-all term that means anyone who's anti-government and really means nothing at all, then who is safe from these measures?
I love it, man. I love Ben Scallywag. Ben Scallop. Much love to him. Bro, he's given a perfect example. Yeah, so like, who would be safe from these measures? Because that's a catch-all term. It's like when I say, the immigrants are destroying the country. I'm really just talking about Roman gypsies. It's like a catch-all term for everybody. You're like, this person's destroying the country. But it's like, well, reality, it's just Roman gypsies that are just taking over the inner city and just flipping going crazy with knives and stabbings and shit. They're going to be arresting everyone, guys. Anyone could be a criminal then. It's like in Batman: The Dark Knight, when, he goes to see, Alfred and all these different people, or what's his name, yeah, and they're in the basement, and he's showing them the new technology where you can monitor all the people's phones and databases. They have that in real life, because they're monitoring everything. Since 2012, you have no privacy. Since 2012.
And by the way, even if the state didn't abuse these powers, simply by creating a backdoor into the encryption, you are creating an opportunity for other potentially hostile actors to abuse it. Hackers and foreign states and spies can also gain access to it if they're skilled enough. The Irish Council for Civil Liberties, the United Nations, and the European Court of Human Rights have all expressed major concerns about this, and I believe that the government has some serious questions to answer with regards to this plan.
I love it. Perfect. Perfect review by Ben Scallywag. Okay, like, comment, share his videos, man. Shout out to Ben Scallon, my brother. Let's do a collaboration sometime. Everybody, go over to Grip Media and tell them that County Gains wants to collaborate with them, okay? We would absolutely rule the internet if I was with Grip Media. But, it's amazing to see, guys. I definitely think that, the powers are going to be well overtaken. Power corrupts, absolutely. Absolute power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts, guys. It's just crazy, lads. The Garda wants to be able to read your messages, steal your information, steal your privacy. Absolutely crazy. The last news story we have here is a funny one. It says this is in Drury Street in Dublin. Okay, separately from this video, minute the sun hits, there's always some good food sitting outside these cocktail spots. Free, few drinks with the homegirls. They chat about books, work, and all that stuff. And we see a homeless drug addict in the city stealing drinks off people. Watch this, lads.
Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. And right now, you can save £50 per person. That's £200 off for a family of 4.
Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. Nothing beats homeless crack and heroin addicts stealing your drinks and food on a night out in Dublin. Nothing beats that. I love you guys all. If you want to help support me, hit the join link underneath the video. For just €3 a month can help support me push back against mainstream media, because mainstream media will never talk about these subjects ever. They're bought and paid for. I love you all, and I will see you all in the next one, lads. Peace.